We've got about 10 minutes for conversation related to what you just shared with us, which was amazing. Quite incredible. Anyone have any questions or comments?
Hi, it's Umberto. Thank you, Stephen and Craig, for that amazing presentation. And Stephen, actually, to both of you, I think I would add to those challenges the resistance and backlash from men's rights activists, and I wonder if you can share some thoughts on that as well.
Well, you know, it's part of our world. Our men who feel victimized by this and feel challenged by in their power, and in some respects would like to fight back and see. And that so particularly in the child custody arena is where a lot of the energy is. Court battles and so on. That's where, in fact, the interest at Jane Doe Inc., the state coalition, was born of those challenges. That tells you so it's always part of it, and that the leadership here at the coalition was kind of fed up with only hearing from the men that hated their work, and were wanting to end their work, and both in the courts and the streets, both. And so they mobilized themselves, the men that they knew who were supportive of the work. And that's where some of the beginnings that were happening when I joined their process. And so all along the way, there's been a conversation about that. The protests at White Ribbon Day campaign, statewide events, have been from them, particularly to edit the pledge. This is what to edit the pledge to say against violence against women, and they'll stand up and yell out, and children and men. And so that kind of sense of being excluded about something and not included in some conversation. And so we have found that the greater there's been a local voice of men who care and think about this and believe that there's a strong dimension of male offending that needs to be addressed and changed and ended, is more that happens, the less strong the voice of the men's rights community seems to be in that locality. It's anecdotal, it's not real, but we feel that there's a helpful contribution. The other piece we feel we do that's helpful for the particularly the women in the field who are doing direct services work is to know which men are on their side and which men are not about this work. And so part of my role has been to help distinguish those things. And that one of the main distinguishing features is I suggest they ask a question to the group they're talking to if they provide parenting education. And if they provide parenting education, they're unlikely to provide court advocacy. Those are the two dimensions. And the groups that are doing fathers' rights work are doing primarily, if only, court advocacy. And the folks that are doing responsible parenting or responsible fatherhood work probably aren't involved, if they are at all, with court advocacy. And if they are, they're feeling kind of mixed about the work. But they're primarily doing parent education and so on. So that's where the distinguishing feature. So it's always been there, and it's the model that we've grown is kind of an indirect confrontation of it, but it's there and continues to be there. Interesting, particularly in the field of working with the fathers' education, responsible fathers' education work and movement, is how it interfaces with the court custody piece. Because it's an interesting part, because I don't, maybe others of you who have been doing this work some will find that the facilitator in the group who have a guy coming up tomorrow in court and he's asked to go to court to be there on his behalf, how does that work? So it's part of the dynamic that happens here. So it's in there. It's part of what we do, is have the conversation, conversations sometimes with them even.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on the men's rights or answers to Umberto's question about the men's rights responses?
I'll just say that the one place that we've had the most direct interaction with them was in relationship to the Men Overcoming Violence program, the batterer intervention work. What I'm more interested in is the subtler issues or the grayer areas of, where we, at the last summit, where somebody is on the side who's a strong advocate for men of color and fathers issues raises concerns. He feels like the rights and needs of those men are not being adequately addressed within a context that his perception is focuses on sort of the vector of men's oppression of women, and the issue of how to address the rights of men who are marginalized and oppressed in a variety of ways, and not be seen as a men's rights, enemy, but as somebody who is a potential ally to, and how do we find common ground there? I'm noticing that, Craig, you put a chat question about efforts to connect together the various projects in Africa. And it's an interesting thing because when Men's Resources International started, our mission included building a global network. Men's Resources International started in 2004, the same year that MenEngage started. And so when we saw that MenEngage was actually stepping up to this build a global network thing with a lot more capacity and ability to implement that, we backed off. But as you remember, when we did the training in Nigeria, we had men from Zambia who had just been in the previous training, and Fidel from Rwanda attend that training because and then when we did the training in Rwanda, we brought men from Zambia and Nigeria because what we were looking to do was to build that regional network. And we were on that trajectory and then kind of backed off of that because we saw it being addressed in other ways.
So, Stephen, when you were talking about when you first went international, you wanted to see if your models that were developed in Massachusetts and the U.S. was adaptable. What was your experience in your first kind of response when you went internationally and found the similarities, found that it was adaptable? Mostly I'm thinking about similarities about male cultural norms throughout the world. Did that surprise you? Did you see those similarities? Did it surprise you?
I was operating with a basic assumption that there's some cross-cutting things that are going to be the same. That was but I also recognized that I was coming from a privileged white North American context, and it's easy to assume everybody's like you because that's what we do all the time. And so, it was really a check to go, how does this work? And it wasn't only the realities of male socialization that we were checking, we were also checking our methodology. Does the methodology that we use in the training work in other contexts? Because again, the educational methodologies that we use are often very culturally bound and often pretty, from white culture, pretty, dominating in many different forms. And so it was very confirming to see that the methodology that we were using, which in fact was developed on the basis of the work of people like Paulo Freire, that talks about what does it mean to develop literacy at the community level for social awareness and social change, that theory really worked quite well in terms of here's what works at across many different cultural contexts. And the methodology itself spoke to the process of liberation and empowerment.
Yep. That's great. So how are other thoughts that people are having, both either related to Craig and Stephen's presentation, related to the work, related to transitions and making those transitions, and how do you do them well? I really like what you're mentioning, Stephen, about methodology. How do we replicate practices in multiple cultures? And so others have any comments or questions? Dig a little deeper.
Yes, Chuck. The one question I have for both Steve and Craig is about supporting the new generation of men and boys, and how to do that mentorship. What kind of strategies do you think are possible to continue encouraging new generation of men and boys taking up on this work?
And just to clarify, we'll start with Stephen and Craig on this kind of a question, but also it'll be opened up to all of us as this community of practice process here too.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I think, Craig and I, we're hoping to sit down and have that conversation a little bit more. I know that Merge is making a strong effort to get younger people involved in lots of different levels, and that's been really fun for me to have that opportunity. And some of it might be uniquely in the moment. I am now providing mentoring, coaching, and fundraising support for a 24-year-old man in Goma, the Democratic Republic of Congo, to create a community-based organization that serves vulnerable children. And that he was somebody I met when I was there in November and just spoke to me, and I felt like, wow, he reminds me of me, and I can help him. And so just purely by text messaging and some email exchanges and a GoFundMe campaign that I have created, he's now running programs for these children, and is engaging other young people to be volunteers in this initiative. And so it's, that was idiosyncratic. It was seeing a moment of time where I felt like, wow, I could really be really helpful here. This guy is way out there on his own with very little resources around him. And so that was a sweet opportunity, and it's still unfolding.
Oswaldo, it's a good question, and I think the idea of mentorship is really strong in other communities. Particularly there's a really strong mentorship vibe in the African American community around me here in the Boston area about that. That's a strong purpose about mentoring youth, move them forward, grow them. So tapping those real existing places, working with leadership there to think about the idea of gender and the leadership of what healthy masculinity is. This is where I feel like it can be kind of, how do you amplify this work by going to places where the work's going on and work with them on the content. There's every one of the members of our coalition. I know the slide I put up said 60, but it's, some mergers have happened. I think the real number right now is more like 56 because of the merger. I don't know, Emiliano, if you have any mergers in Texas between these programs, but the numbers seem to change on a regular basis around here. But that every one of them is already in the schools. The first thing that agencies think about for prevention work is to work with youth. And so all of them have got engagements with local schools and working with middle school and high school groups. And one of the models that's popular are teams you train up a group of teens to go teach their peers, to talk with their peers with, so peer leadership processes. And having influence on the content there seems very meaningful to me. That our coalition has this strong promotion of unhealthy masculinities, and to ask the question, what is that? And to ask the kids, what is that? And have them think about it, to be kind of literate about that in relation to the media that they consume. And to be able to kind of think about that, that's where the work is going on now. And how do we make there to be a path from there to being part of the work going forward? That's not so clear. Going from there, like I have had plenty of interns who in high school went to a Mentors in Violence Prevention program, because in Massachusetts for a while, MVP was in a bunch of high schools. Then there was a hiatus because funding was dropped. They weren't in so many high schools anymore. And some of those programs endured the drought of funding, and some new funding's come along recently, and it's being reintroduced in a big group of high schools this coming year. But those high school boys get excited about it and carry it to their colleges sometimes, and then sometimes they find their way to me in a internship process. So just having a little internship running helps, So that's one of the like institutionalizing pathways is kind of what I'm thinking about. What are some pathways that we can note as things that institutionalize such? And that's one path I've seen. No one's doing that exactly on purpose, but that's what's going on. So I want to think about that.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah.
Thanks, Stephen. Other comments, questions? Sharing?
If you're talking, Emiliano, you're on mute.
There we go. All right.
There you go.
So I have a question for Stephen. I just want to thank both of you and Craig for sharing your journey with us. I think there's in the process, I've been very fortunate to walk alongside both of you and learn a great deal from you. So I just want to thank you for all the guidance and mentorship you both have given to me. I'm curious to hear from both of you in terms of your identities as these, these cis white men who are doing the work, and in a state like Massachusetts. You talked about some of the diversity in terms of communities of color, especially men of color. How do you, and also women of color and women's organizations, how have you held yourself accountable to those individual groups and are sort of the lasting impressions that you have, or any sort of advice that you have for folks who are really trying to make sure to center those people? I think you both did a great job of centering women in your work. So I'm kind of curious in terms of how you see yourself being held accountable in your work, and if are there any lessons there that we can take and apply to our own work around the country and around the world as well.
Excellent question,
Stephen. It's a real challenge.
Here's what I'm thinking. May or may not be a direct answer. That my work has evolved. The work at the Men's Resource Center was primarily in the context of men's groups, whether those were men who batter, or men who are survivors of childhood abuse, or young men, or the framework and the paradigm was, let's get men together so that we can have this conversation and raise our consciousness and support each other and engage in the world. And that has a tremendous value and a very important place. And yet when we started so the accountability in that time frame looked one way, and it was having women on our board, and doing partnership activities with the local women's center to the extent that they were interested. The message from one of the organizations was, you know what, we've got our hands full. We really, accountability right now would be you go and do your own work, and, don't try to get something from us. And when we started Men's Resources International, the frame was different, that the frame wasn't men's groups. The frame was women and men together, talking about this issue of masculinity and how we have a shared investment, how it impacts all of us in the same ways and in different ways. And we have a shared investment and a shared responsibility to do something about it. And that's a different kind of process and a different kind of, so accountability looks different in that framework.
For me, I was thinking it, when I first listened to your question, Emiliano, I thought of it personally, as an individual in the work. There's an organizational dimension, of course, that we are also operating on when we think of this. But for me, it's like, I understand that my view of the world is narrow, that I have just my perspective, but learning to own my perspective has helped a lot. That it's not that I can tell my story, and I know that my story is not your story, but there's an intersection, and I want to hear your story, that I'm genuinely interested, and I want to know what the values are in your story and what's going on, and that I feel honored to be in an environment where, it's not my story, that's the majority story, it's a different story, and that's how I hold it, and that I hold my accountability to hearing those stories, and again, another piece of shutting up and listening to the degree that I can, and that it's to know that the work I'm rolling out, helping roll out, is going to be is a framework and doesn't have a lot of content. It's got to be brought alive by the people holding it, and so that's what is, to me, the piece. And the hard parts come where I make presumptions. assume some things. Like language can come across really differently. Like take the word gender, and gender is code for different things for different communities. You know, like gender-based violence or gender might mean to a cis straight guy means gay. And it might be that that's pretty frightening. You know, we're not ready to really talk about that in an embracing way. The idea of homophobia is a very different place in different cultures, it seems. Different place, you know, very, you know, like, I like to think, I don't know if this holds true across the board, that it's easier for us white guys to talk about it since we have whiteness to fall back on. You know, and, you know, it's, if you have a power to fall back on, it's easier to kind of question the oppressions that are there. I think seems to be real in some cases. And I just get excited when it surfaces in communities that are not my own. I just get very excited about that. And just, you know, and so particularly in Massachusetts and the Boston area, the fatherhood work is held by African-American men most strongly. That's just doing the work. And talking about violence against women isn't always the topic they want to talk about. They're willing to say some things and willing to say that they're going to be responsible for that, but that may not be the first topic on the table. It's the second or third topic. Something else is the first topic. So that's the kind of experience I've had. Not unlike, you know, learning about kind of the Native American community in Massachusetts and what they're willing to hold about this. Just so many rich differences there, you know, and it's sometimes I feel so almost jealous that there's a story that the people there tell that surfaces kind of an honoring of a mother that isn't in my story in anywhere near the same way. It's just really awesome, you know, when it can be surfaced as well as it is surfaced there. So that's sort of where I take it. I'm humbled by the challenge.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Emiliano. That's the question that continues to needs to be asked continually, right? Is how we have these partnerships and we all experience different levels of oppression and different levels of privilege, and how do we speak to that and do it well? I mean, I think sometimes about even our NAMEN calls, steering committee calls, and what's the process and what's the method and how white is it, right? And how open then is it to diversity and how straight is it? And so all those questions in the process. So what, tell me, so when you had to do, both of you talked about these transitions, right? You made serious transitions throughout your career. So what was that like? Just making the transition, was it scary? Was it confident? Was it confusing? Was it a great learning experience? Because a lot of us in the work are thinking about transition or making transitions. And is there anything specific about making these transitions that's notable for you and your experiences?
I don't know. Generalize.
Go ahead, Greg.
I was going to say it's hard to generalize, but it's a deep question. And in my past transitions, so the time came, the time was right, and it was time to do what was happening, and this sort of kind of trusting that it will work out, and that's sort of how it happened. You know, there wasn't a lot of planning involved when I left Raven in St. Louis, but I was following somebody to do something new in life, and it was time to make that transition. And then there was a fairly personal choice, and then to grow back, to step back from the direct service work and direct program work and get involved in kind of a advisory capacity for a number of years, and and then decide to go back to it. That was very deliberate. I remember that. So I guess it has to do with making choices. You know, you sort of have to put one foot in front of the other and trust oneself.
Yeah, I would say,
I'll go ahead, Stephen.
I would say very similar to what you said, Craig. For me, this has been a spiritual journey, as well as a social and political and personal, you know, lots of levels. And the spiritual part of it is really listening to the calling. And that has guided me each step of the way. And sometimes I've been more graceful than others at my, you know, how I've navigated that. But there has been a sense of a calling that is saying it's time for something new. And it has often required tremendous patience, because sometimes the process of transition doesn't move as quickly as you might want it to.
One of the things that you both brought up, and Emiliano, you just brought up too, is this idea of accountability. How has accountability in your transition processes, how important has accountability been, or how has accountability directed you in making these changes from communities to communities and working with communities and different kinds of communities and same communities from which you're from or identify being from? So that could be gender, that could be race, ethnicity, geographic, I mean, across the spectrum. And how has accountability been a piece of that that's helped you direct you in these transitional processes?
Well, it was certainly central to my moving from the Men's Resource Center to Men's Resources International, that I felt that the structure, you know, that there was this institution that was doing marvelous work and, you know, amazing thing, and it was white, basically. You know, it had its efforts at diversity, but I had been working at trying to create more of a diverse organization, and I kept banging my head against what I couldn't figure out how to do. And at a certain point, it felt like I need to, you know, the way to do this is you got to start over. You got to start from scratch. And so that, you know, that was part of the drive to go, okay, Men's Resources International, based in Springfield, Massachusetts, working in communities of color. That's, you know, with a partner, a colleague who is a man of color, and having a board that reflects, you know, a broader gender and racial diversity. So that was it. Maybe that was cheating, but that was how I moved with that.
Great. Craig, anything to add?
Mine is about celebrating community, and that this is not assuming that I'm thinking particularly about the campaign that I operate, the White Ribbon Day campaign in Massachusetts, that how it's experienced locally is up to the locality, and that, you know, the cultural groups, I'm going to call them groups that have a strong personal identity, need to find their own way to hold it if it's going to be held, you know, and that whether it's a language, you know, the stronger differences are between the Portuguese-speaking community in Massachusetts and a Latino community, an African American community, and a Native American community, and then kind of a white middle class community, and so they're just a respect that it's not, there's no one way, but there is universal truth to the idea of safety and respect. That this is something we can want and need and have, and that's universal.
Great, thank you. So we've got about 2 minutes left in our community of practice event here, and want to open it up for any kind of last thoughts or questions here for everyone.
The question I have is, where do we go from here with the community of practice? This was a great, like, piloting it, and we did it internally to the steering committee, and it's for me, I love having a chance to have this kind of conversation with you all, and would welcome more opportunities to interact in ways that are not purely kind of organizational administration. So I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a whole level of closeness and intimacy with this that is not present necessarily during the, every other month steering committees. But I agree, Steve. I mean, this is just what a great opportunity to hear from colleagues in the field and reflecting on your learning and how that has impacted this whole movement. And so I mean, I think something like this is we juggle with other learning and sharing opportunities with the webinar group, with the program working group, that this is such a valuable piece to this broader conversation. It's really much more intimate, and this was an hour and a half. I feel like it was 20 minutes long.
Well, maybe we get 2 more volunteers and do this again.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we will. This will continue. That's for sure.
Okay.
Chuck, you did a wonderful job of facilitating this, and I mean, you have so much personal experience with all of this as well. But I just appreciated how you kept it moving and just flowed beautifully. So thank you for facilitating it. That really helps.
Oh, thanks, Alan. So we'll figure out a talk more about a process of the next COP and figure out even a process on how to talk about it. But I think perhaps what I'll do is send out an email. We'll do some logistics around the recording. I think it's very powerful. I think it's going to be very useful for many people to view this recording and participate in this. And I think we'll put out some ideas to the steering committee about next kinds of focus and ideas of the next COP focus and what people are thinking about. Again, with the idea of being able to share our work, share our experiences, and then also in ways that can be, for some of these experiences, replicated in different communities and how that can best be done.
Awesome. I would like to echo everything that's been said and add my gratitude to all of you as well. I think this was a really great start, and I wish more people, I'm thinking Russ in particular, around the question of transition and how much he probably would have enjoyed to be part of this as well. So too bad he wasn't able to attend. But yeah, I too enjoyed sort of the personal connection and storytelling from both of you, Craig and Stephen. And maybe as the next opportunity, we could have some of the younger generation folks involved in this work talk about their experiences and maybe answer the other side of the question of where to now and how do we work on these issues across generations and all that. I think that would be a very interesting conversation to have as well. And to say that this was refreshing, because so many of these kinds of sessions end up being very technical in nature. We discuss frameworks and models and all that, and that's very helpful too. And I think we should incorporate that into future sessions of our community of practice. But I certainly appreciate this a great deal. So thank you.
Yeah, we're trying COPs here at the coalition with our prevention workers around the state, primarily RRP grantees that Craig mentioned earlier. But we're doing multiple COPs on different, like I'm moderating the one on rural and border communities, and we have one on community level work, one on evaluation, and one on our break the box curriculum. So, we're trying. I really like this format in terms of having the providing time for folks to lay out their work and giving folks an opportunity to ask questions. I really enjoyed that. It also makes a difference. We're using Zoom and we're using video conferencing on our COPs, so I think that makes a really difference. People feel very connected, and it does feel very intimate. It feels like we're having a conversation in the same room together. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah.
I really like the format. I think you have to have a strong moderator, somebody who can move the conversation along, which I think Chuck did really well. And I just, you know, I think it was very appropriate for this to be our first one. I think with both of you and the transitions that you're making in your professional and personal lives, I'm just really excited to stay connected to you and continue to see you do the work, because I think that's also, you know, this was, I think, I feel very fortunate that I could be a part of this conversation, and so I'm excited about sharing it with folks and hearing about what folks think about this in the field, and so I'm excited about the next one.
Yeah.
One more person. Yeah. Looking at the sign-in sheet, I think it was Viviana.
I'm hearing somebody talk about sign-in sheet. So it's a muting thing.
Yeah, just one last. For someone like myself who came into this arena after having left an entirely different profession, and it just really helps fill in some gaps, Stephen and Craig, with some history. Craig, I've talked to you, got some bits and pieces, the old, you know, the Iowa Drake University, you know, third conference, Men and Masculinity conference. That was a really fun connection to make with you being here in Iowa. And Craig, when I began thinking about my career changing drastically from what I was doing, was right when I think you were headed over to, on one of your slides, the 2004, 2005, really broadening your service to the colleagues in Africa. It's really awesome to kind of have some of those history kind of filled in, and so thank you both for sharing your stories today.
That's one thing I know too, is that we do have individuals on the steering committee with substantial international work and inter-community work too. And again, looking at these methodologies and looking at the content, and you know what you're talking about, Craig, about who determines the content, and then Stephen talking about the methodologies and are they suitable and that kind of stuff. So we have a lot of. It's amazing how much really expertise and value we have and resources. Just on our steering committee alone, we haven't even expanded yet into a membership and others. I mean, it's everywhere. So it really is a pleasure after these many years, right? And we're still having these conversations, you know, since the 70s, and still working with women, and still have some high ideals and high commitments to accountability, to many different folks from many different kinds of communities and identities. And so I think as we keep moving on with this commitment and keep moving on in these kinds of avenues of sharing and listening, and sharing and listening, and then replicating and action, we will see the vision that we want to see here ultimately, as we continue to move this forward and move it from generation to generation and into individuals using their influence to change organizational practices, public policies, to stop this stuff before it is even happening, and change the social norms that support these kinds of injustices. So I appreciate you all's participation and commitment to this work. It is an honor to be with you all. That's for certain.
Well, thanks, Chuck. So how do we end this? Do we just start waving and saying bye?
Winks. I think winking is good.
Winking.
Yeah, winking. Yeah, and we'll do some logistics around the recording and stuff. I'll talk to you, Craig.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Brilliant.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.